because it didn't happen if it's not on Instagram, right?
Well, Elaine, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, welcome to Chicago. Welcome to the MCA stage. Welcome to our visitors today.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out on a really cold night, although it's probably not that cold for you all.
Well, first of all, I just want to say I'm thrilled and honored to welcome you. Our conversation tonight, as Madeline had mentioned, about diversity, about youth empowerment, about inclusion, set against the backdrop of this very complicated cultural moment. I think this is one conversation that the MCA is ready and willing to engage with thought leaders such as you, Elaine. And so for the next hour, I know our time's ticking, really just looking forward to learning about your insight, your perspective, and the kind of trajectory that brought you to the stage today. So shall we begin?
Let's dive in.
All right. Elaine, you began your career at Teen Vogue, I believe as the beauty editor back in 2012. And then in 2016, you were named the editor-in-chief. During your tenure, you were credited with revolutionizing Teen Vogue. I wonder if you could paint a picture for those of us on the outside. What did you walk into when you first took on the leadership position?
Well, first of all, I have to say, especially because I'm in Chicago, I started my career at Ebony magazine. And I would not be on this stage, I would not have had the opportunities that I've had, I would not have walked into the roles that I have with as much confidence as I did if I did not start at Ebony magazine. So I have to give credit to that important institution because it is where I learned how to have how to bring my outsider's perspective as an editor into an insider world. And I learned how to be a journalist and how to tell stories through the lens of Black culture. And I kind of developed this passion for elevating the outside voice by being an outsider. I mean, I came from a very small town in Newark, California, which no one's ever heard of, and not Newark, New Jersey. And no one I knew had ever dreamed of going to New York for work, chasing a big dream like a magazine career, which to me felt too competitive to even dream up. So when I had the opportunity to start at Ebony under an amazing, amazing Black female leader named Harriet Cole, frankly, I thought that was my wildest dream come true. But the very first day when I got there, I cried in the bathroom because I realized very acutely that I was at the very, very bottom of a system that kind of keeps Black titles at the bottom of a hierarchy. And so I started as an underdog, and I was constantly proving myself and proving the value of Black people and of a title like Ebony. And so I think it's important that I start there because from that perspective, I was able to cross over to a place like Condé Nast, which I nicknamed the Condé Castle when I was at Ebony, and I set my sights there from that first day. And I thought, you know what? I have a very diverse background. I come from an interracial family. A very, I have a lot of different friends and family members who come from different backgrounds, and I thought, I want to be a bridge in the divide, in this racial divide particularly, and I think I can. And so by the time I got my job at Glamour, which actually happened before Teen Vogue as well, I found myself sort of conforming and assimilating just to build up credibility and just to feel like I deserved to even be there. And then by the time I got hired at Teen Vogue as the beauty director, and I was still very young, I was 25, I distinctly remember a moment that completely changed the way I approached my career from then on, which I think resulted in some of the work that I was able to do at Teen Vogue. And it was working for this promotion, being promoted into this big position as beauty director, and seeing my name in headlines for the first time next to my race in 2012. It wasn't just, Elaine Welteroth becomes the new beauty director at Teen Vogue. It was first black beauty director in Condé Nast history. And so for me, that really put into perspective what unique opportunity and responsibility I was walking into that role with. Whereas prior to that, I'd spent so much time just trying to fit in, trying to assimilate, trying to, speak a certain language for a certain audience. We can just call it white. That's what it was primarily. And so but in that moment I thought I would be doing a disservice to the communities of color, to the people who identify with me, if I come in here and pretend to be anything but what I am. And, before that happened, I was sort of thinking about the model of what it is to be a beauty director at a place like Teen Vogue, at a place with Vogue in the title, and feeling a little bit of, imposter syndrome. Do I know enough about capital F fashion? Do I know all of the photographers? Do I don't come from a prestigious school even. So there was a lot of doubt. But once I really saw that opportunity and seized it and just said, you know what, being me is going to be different and better than anything that's been not better, but different than anything that's been here. Let me just go for that. I'm just gonna pave my own lane. And so in that role, that really created the early stages of the changes that later the world would sort of see at Teen Vogue, because it starts small. With anything, with any change you want to make, it starts small. It is one decision to the next. It is one story at a time. It is one foot in front of the other, one higher after the next, right? So I think that it's interesting. I felt like I needed to slow down and start farther back, because I do think that by the time people the rest of America kind of heard about what was happening at Teen Vogue, it did sort of seem like it happened overnight. It was this overnight success. And as with any movement, anything that requires, involves a lot of change, it never happens overnight. It's always about moments and the drum beats that build up to it. And so I was at Teen Vogue for actually 6 years. I think 5 years before I was promoted to the leadership. And by that time, we'd already been quietly disrupting stuff. We had already been breaking the rules, and the beauty of working at a place like Teen Vogue, which was considered a smaller brand in this much larger company of brands, is no one was really paying attention. So no one was really going to tell us no. So we were just sort of doing our thing. Right. And then we hit critical mass. But the world, to answer your question, the world was totally different. Yeah. Even just 5 years ago, totally different. Pre-woke America, no one was wanting to have these hard conversations about social justice and politics and, racial identity and gender identity and, sexual fluidity, all of these things that we talk about every single day now, right? And so we all were learning while we were running. Yeah. We were all teaching each other. We had to allow space to make mistakes and to take risks, which we took a lot of. Yeah. But it was definitely a fashion-focused teen magazine that was considered the younger sister to Vogue. It wasn't really a place that that housed these kinds of conversations before I got there.
So back in the green room, we were talking about change doesn't happen without setting your intentions, right? And I know that when you left Teen Vogue, you described helping define the core values of that publication. And I think, which you defined as equality, human rights, empowering young women, and building up thought leaders of the future. And you've already talked about some of the moments that sort of indicated for you that Teen Vogue was on the right path towards achieving those ideals. I wonder if could you talk a little bit more about how those values, how you carry those values into your workplace?
Well, let's see. I think, where would I start with that? I think that, again, it goes back to that point of story by story. And I think there were a couple kind of pivotal stories and hires that really changed the trajectory of our mission. We didn't come together and say we're going to change. We're going to set this new mission and go from there. Actually, we just started to do work differently, work that we cared about, that we believed in, work that we saw that was missing in the zeitgeist. And you have to remember, I mean, at that time and even now, the media industry is, print media in particular, but the media industry in general is very challenged. And so everyone's kind of running the same stories. And especially for a young magazine like Teen Vogue, at that point, everyone was shooting our cover girls. You know, we used to corner the market on young Hollywood, and then the young stars that we were, you know, Kendall Jenner was on Vogue every other month, of Vogue's cover. And so we had to, I remember saying, I'm bored. Who else is bored? And I think as a storyteller, as an artist, your gut is your compass. And if you are bored, you better believe your audience is. And so at a time like that, it was sort of pivot or die, you know? It was like, if we continue to go forward and doing the same things and not rethinking our model, we probably will not be around very much longer. So what do we have to lose? Let's throw caution to the wind. Let's throw out these old models and let's just do work we believe in. So at least if we go down with our fists up. We're like, you know, we're proud of what we've done. So there was no model for what we did when we did it, and it was very scary, I guess, in a sense. But right away, because of social media, we saw there was an audience for this kind of content that went deeper, that explored the nuance, that, you know, gave a voice to the youth perspective in a way that we had not seen in mainstream media before. Certainly, there were places like Rookie. I don't know how many like young. I can't really see you guys, but. But we were able to translate some of that in a way that still felt like Vogue. It still felt like it could be Teen Vogue. One thing I'm proud of is that, and part of our intention, part of our purpose, was to create this really safe space for all intersections of our audience's identities to exist and to be celebrated. So it wasn't like we were dissing women's magazines or fashion writing or beauty coverage. It was like, no, we do that too. But you can be a young person who cares about bronzer and, you know, how to zhuzh your hair and dry shampoos and Bieber and Selena and what's going on with them, and also want to be on the front lines of Black Lives Matter and, you know, care about LGBTQ rights and want to know how to be an ally. Like, these things are not mutually exclusive. And I think before that, it definitely felt like you had to choose. You had to choose a side. And we had to prove as well that we could be a credible news source for political coverage, for, you know, more sort of culturally conscious work. So it took time, and it did take intention. And I would say my very first hire was the first sort of stake in the ground for me in terms of wanting to start to change the culture, because I think any outward change starts on the inside.
Can you talk about your first hire?
Yeah. So when I got hired at Teen Vogue as beauty director, my first hire was a male beauty editor. He was the best guy for the job. He was the best person for the job, and he happened to be a male. And I remember pitching him, and I was so excited about him, and I wanted my editor to meet him, and she said, "Oh, a boy in the beauty department? I don't know about that." And I was just like, but Glee's the #1 show on TV. I think our audience is ready. I don't really see an issue here. And so he came in and just shook things up. I think in you know, now that I've had time to reflect, I think that not only was he the best guy for the job, but he also was another outsider who knew what it was to be othered, who really wanted to, you know, use beauty as a tool for conversations about inclusion and representation. And I think it's important when you get your foot in the door, to open the door for the next person who may not have had a seat at the table if you didn't create one for them. And so he actually helped me. He became an ally to me inside the office, and he helped me find my voice editorially. He helped me push for changes that I might not have had I not had that support internally. And together, we started to kind of foster this different culture. I mean, like, from small things. I think it's small things. Like, it was really quiet in that office and really stiff and rigid before we got there. We would just play Mariah Carey really loud, you know, and not encouraging that, but there was this like different energy in the office, and there was different ideas that were being brought to the table, and I think from there he went on to he led the digital team to great success, and because he came in with that same moral compass and the desire to prioritize inclusion, every single one of his hires reflected that same priority.
That's interesting because I'm trying to draw a thread from your early days here in Chicago and citing your mentor, Harriet Cole, and how you're sort of paying that forward by stating your commitment to building a diversity of pipeline, right? A pipeline and like helping the next generation come up. Could you talk a little bit more about how you're doing that now and having left Teen Vogue? How are you carrying that commitment forward?
Well, I always say that so job titles are temporary, but your purpose is everlasting. And I think while I was even at Teen Vogue, I identified what my why is and what drives me. And it really is this passion for helping to give a voice to the youth perspective, to help elevate issues that affect the next generation, and to create space for marginalized communities to really have their perspectives recognized. And this is the time to do that. There is such a need for that. And so I think that, in everything that I do, I use that as my sort of North Star. And I think that we all, no matter where we are, no matter what job title you have or what industry you're in, I think it's important to identify what your personal mission is, what your purpose is, not to get too cliche, but really what is your reason for being, and how is your work serving that? Because we can so easily get pulled into other people's missions and lose sight of what is unique to our voice, what only we can do. Like, what's your zone of genius? How can you operate in that with more of your time, with more of your energy? And so I've found a way to kind of craft that for myself as my own sort of entity, and it takes shape in all different types of ways. I mean, I just finished a book that is coming out in June 11th. Just picked my cover today. You guys, having a book is like having a baby. I haven't had a baby, but I feel about 11 months pregnant right now. Woo, it is really an all-consuming effort, but I really believe that everything that I have done in my career and in my life to date culminates in what this book will be.
And Can you give us a little sneak peek? Or?
Well, I haven't really even talked about it publicly because I'm so deep in the trenches. For any writers in here, you understand, like, if you're like swimming in words for months, to come out and speak in like coherent sentences is such a challenge. This is like the first time I've been outside in a while. But so I'm not even going to try to attempt to put it in like a pithy one-liner that will sell it, but I will just say that it is, my hope and intention is that it will be so much bigger than my story. It is so many people's story, and there's so many universal themes that I hope will be I hope that this will be the way that we can crack open conversations that we need to have more. And I hope for it to be a tool that puts me in community with my tribe, which is really broad, I'm realizing. And even here tonight, I'm like, wow, like there's so many people in Chicago, so great outfits, great, but care about the world. Like so I really hope that this is an opportunity for me to be in communication directly, offline, about things that matter, and hopefully help all of us progress in our lives and our careers. But also, I've done work with ABC News, and I reported for them during the March for Our Lives, and then I partnered with them on producing a documentary that went a little deeper and told the stories of some of the student survivors who really didn't get the big press hits. I mean, I think mainstream media focused on like a handful, but there were so many students who were sort of left in the shadows, and we wanted to bring their stories to light. And so a number of projects I've done in this past year, but I I don't worry about how or what. You become a magnet for what your intention is, and I think that I have carved out a path for myself where I have drawn. I sort of have drawn opportunities to me that are in line with who I am and what I care about. But that it takes a long time to get there, you know. Like, so I don't want to talk about that like as if that's a universal norm. It really isn't, and I do appreciate that. But back to our conversation in the green room, I think when I said it takes intention, I was actually talking about specifically, just as an anecdote, I was talking about the CBS hire today, or the news about the White House correspondents. Are you guys familiar with that story that came out today? Well, apparently, you know, CBS News came out with their roster of reporters who are going to be, you know, in the White House, and there isn't a single black reporter. And so they're being called out. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez called it out for what it is. And she said, in 2019, it's unacceptable. Try again.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, I just got chills. And I feel like Alexandria represents the future. But it takes someone who is in a seat of power to really prioritize that mission of making inclusion the norm. And if no one's going to do that, it will never change. So I'm so proud of people like Alexandria, and there's so many other young leaders who are rising up, people of color who are rising up and changing the priority from inside institutions, from inside systems that really need to be disrupted. And I think that Teen Vogue was another example of that. You know, you have to, I always say, in order to change the story, you have to change the storytellers. My caveat to that is, in order to change the storytellers, you need to change who's in those seats of power, who's even determining who gets a seat, you know? And I'm seeing that change slowly but surely, but we have to continue to keep it at the top of the agenda, or we will slide back, as we have across many other challenging issues in our country.
So you talked about Alexandria, you talked about the Parkland survivors. Can you, all in a way to sort of paint this next generation of change makers? For us in the audience, could you paint a portrait, if it's possible, of who those people are, what do they look like, what is their voice, and how are they using the tools that they have at this disposal to express their agency?
Well, I'm sure there's plenty of them in the room tonight. Right? You can clap for yourself. I have to say, during my time at Teen Vogue, I came into contact with so many inspiring young people who are so much braver, bolder, smarter than I was when I was their age. And it was and is the joy of my career to amplify their voices and to give them the mic, like just hand them the mic. Because they are truly going to be, they're our hope. They are hands down our hope for a better future, because they are going to demand that the status quo is disrupted. I feel like my generation, millennials, we came in here to kind of start turning the ship. They came in with they were born with their fists up. They're just like accepting nothing less than what really has been our vision for the future. And so, what are these people? They are incredibly informed, the most informed generation of young people in history. They grew up with the internet in their hand as their third arm, frankly. And that's significant. I mean, it's even very different from my generation. I remember when like AOL and like high-speed internet began, but this next generation can't remember a time when there was no internet and they couldn't just look at their phone for anything and everything. It's a generation that cares deeply about being heard. They believe that they can be the change they want to see. They see themselves as change agents. And as an extension of that, the type of work they want to do in the world and the paths that they're carving for themselves are unconventional and really mission-driven. and I don't want to speak in generalities, but this is what the data shows, but it's also from my observation of the kind of like-minded community that we were able to galvanize at Teen Vogue. This is what I saw. There were people who considered themselves activists, no matter what discipline they were studying, and creatives, no matter what discipline they were in. And they really, it's also the most diverse generation in history, which we cannot ignore. And so if you want to stay relevant, if you want to be meaningful, have meaningful impact, if you want to speak to the future, there's no way that you can ignore their voices. I think, Teen Vogue was a case study for that. We were underdogs. No one cared about Teen Vogue. I can openly say that. Not nobody, but it was not. We were just kind of doing what everyone else was doing, and it worked for so long for us. But until we really pivoted and found out, like, in the core what our readers cared about, and we were able to address in the ways in which they were being underserved by mass media, that is when, like, all ships rise. Like, we all kind of came up together and learned together, and were able to create work that meant something. And it would not have happened if we were just a reflection of that generation. I remember being in early meetings and just scrolling through Instagram, scrolling through Tumblr, and reading what our audience was actually talking about on the internet. And it had nothing to do with what we were talking about in the magazine. And I saw so much white space to go deeper. And when I met folks like Yara Shahidi or Rowan Blanchard, I was blown away by how much they knew, even in some cases more than me. They are the ones that really engaged me deeply in thinking differently about activism. They gave me a new definition of what activism was. I remember Rowan Blanchard in this cover story that I worked on with her and Yara together. She said, to me, activism, it was very accessible. She said, activism is a need to know, a need to help, and a need to act. And I was like, if that's the criteria, count me in. And I think that's important. That's really important, because for so many years, we always thought, well, someone else is, I'm not an activist. Who am I to call myself an activist? Who am I? I work in an office all day. But you too, just sometimes the most radical act is just being your authentic self in spaces where you were not intended to be, in systems that were not built for you, and having a voice. That in itself is a form of activism. Wearing your hair natural in spaces where that's considered taboo, that's activism.
You referred to that as accidental activism. I remember reading an article about your visit to Vanderbilt University, and you talked to a room full of students of color, and you talked about accidental activism. Is that what you were talking about?
Wow, you did your research. Like, wow. What page of my Google News was that one on? Yeah, I called it accidental activism because of sort of, my own awakening to the notion that I could actually be a change maker just the way I am. And this generation actually helped me own that. But there are different types of activists, and I talked about a bunch of different, there are the folks who are on the front lines. We need them. There are the folks who are, trying to change the system from the inside, the lawmakers. We have, there are the politicians who play by the rules, but they're subversive in their own way. We have the corporate backers who really have the power of the pocketbook. There's all different types of activists, and I had to figure out who I was going to be at a time like this, because we will all look back on this time and think, what did I do? Was I standing on the right side of history? And our kids are going to want to know. They're going to want to sit around the table and talk about this moment, the way that we talked about the 60s. I remember growing up, I wanted to know where my mom was. I wanted to know where my dad was. What were they doing? Were they picketing? I couldn't even imagine a world like that, and then here we are. But it's funny, I actually, early on in my career, when I was still at Ebony, I remember vividly being invited to this amphitheater, like secret meeting on Fashion Avenue, 7th Avenue, and it was held by a woman named Beth Ann Hardison, who is, some people know her in here. She's a hellraiser. She is an agitator. She has no problem with confrontation, and she is one of the first really respected Black women in fashion who I saw use her position of power to really drive change in an unapologetic way. Like, she wasn't about baby steps. She called the whole industry into a room, and because she was so respected, no one wanted to say no. They were like, I don't know what this is, but I guess here we go. And so I was a little peon editor. I sat way in the back. I didn't know any, I knew the names, but people didn't know who I was. So I was just quiet observing, and one by one, she called out people in the industry by name for not casting Black models in campaigns, on the catwalk, and in stories, editorial stories, and I mean, people had to stand up and own it. It was a full-on call. Like, we have now today, we hide behind our screens when we call folks out. There was no screen to hide behind, my friend. And I just remember being so taken aback, but like enamored and in awe of this mighty force of this woman. And shortly after that, we all saw the all-Black issue of Italian Vogue. And I remember thinking, like, I don't know that one would have happened without the other. This is interesting. And then, it was a one-season thing. So I thought, that's one way to do it. And we need her doing that. But that's not my style. I don't know if I'm prepared to do that. So I was like, what's my style? What am I going to do? And I just put it in the work. And I remember, like, my first story at Teen Vogue was about my natural hair journey, and talking about the ways in which I shrunk my cultural identity growing up because I was trying to be something I wasn't, and my hair was the biggest indicator of that, straightening it and trying to blend in, and how I've gone on this long journey to become more and more myself and more proud of my Blackness, and my hair has just, as a result, grown and grown and grown. And it's like, so my first day at Teen Vogue, whereas all my other kind of first days, important days, proms, picture day, all that stuff, I always straightened my hair. But I was like, for this first day, it's the bigger the better. And the response that I got from that story was wild. And it let me know this is needed from this position, from this platform. And so I remember thinking my way is going to be through storytelling, through authentic storytelling, through representation. Again, you can't change the stories unless you change the storytellers. And if you're not changing the storytellers, that representation you're seeing isn't authentic. And in 2019, we need to be focused on delivering authentic representation, looking at who's behind the story, who is the photographer, who's the stylist, who are the people, who are the image makers behind the work that we're seeing in media that we know matters so much in terms of our identity and what we deem as valuable. And so that was my approach. And so I do kind of, tongue-in-cheek, I think of it as accidental activism because it wasn't that conventional sense of, Angela Davis, Black Panther movement, but I certainly was my own version of being a change maker from the inside.
I'm being given a sort of 5-minute heads up before we open it up for conversations, but so I want to, with our audience, but I want to ask one final question, and I want to get tactical a little bit here because you have such a strong social media presence, and you, I think, have found this way to really seamlessly blend political voice and activist voice and this kind of fun, sort of light vibe. Could you talk a little bit about how you're leveraging social media as a tool to sort of hit in all of those notes, and how do you use that to have robust conversation with your audiences?
Well, I don't know how tactical I can get on this because I'm truly not that I don't overthink it. I think the only way for me to show up is to be authentic. I just talked about that, and it's the same thing on the internet. I mean, I am someone who cares about both politics, social justice, social change, and fashion, and beauty, and entertainment, and culture, you know, as an umbrella. And so I think every time I show up on the internet, I'm responding to a call that is just to be me, and to not worry about what people think or what box I'm not checking, or I think that's old. I think that's the way of the past. And so I think I don't want to be too formulaic about that, you know, but let's see, I do not shy away from putting some controversial perspectives out there, because I really want to engage people in nuanced conversations. I want to dive deeper into the gray areas, because more and more as I've grown up, I've realized that most things that we are debating are not black and white, and yet they're often presented in mainstream media in this very directed, binary way. And there's often I often just find myself kind of reading between the lines and wanting to spend time there. And I found on the internet that there are lots of people who actually do want to engage in really thoughtful discussion. And so it's many times I've engaged and found, wow, there's something. Sometimes I'm scared. Sometimes I am scared to put things out there. I'm like, what am I going to get? For instance, Meghan Markle during the whole royal wedding phenomenon, which frankly I didn't really care about. And I felt like everyone cared so much about this wedding, and I thought, this is so problematic. Are we really in 2018 this excited about a Disney princess narrative? Like, what? I was like alarmed by it, actually. And so,
what did you post on?
What I posted wasn't even about that. That's what I was talking about with everybody. But I decided there was another aspect of it that to me was just so fascinating. As a mixed race woman, I identify as black, but I am mixed race. My father is German-Irish, my mother is African-American, and so when I saw all the coverage around Meghan Markle, I thought, this is so interesting. This is the first time in my adult life that I have ever seen the term biracial used in the media. And I'm thinking about, I lived and reported through the election of President Barack Obama. I've lived through, you know, the first black president, first black woman to win an Oscar, Halle Berry. All of these firsts, so many of these firsts are actually mixed race people, but we've never identified them that way. Because going back to the times of slavery, there was the one-drop rule. And so it's deeper than what we even recognize consciously. And so it's like, if you look black, even though we know your mother is white, we kind of dismiss it because you're black. Your phonetic read is black. And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, unless we are willing to unpack how we think about racial identity in America. Why is Meghan Markle biracial if Barack Obama is black? And I just wanted to talk about that. And I was like, this is probably a bad time. Probably bad timing. No one's going to want to talk about this. And so I was like, but I'm going to just do it anyway. I'm probably going to get a lot of haters, going to lose a lot of followers, but I'm just going to do it anyway. I'm just curious. And it begs the question, you know, are we ready for a black princess? I don't know. I think maybe the closest we can get is biracial to be comfortable. And also, she does read, one could say that she could read as white, or she's passing. If she decided to wear her natural hair, which I would imagine looks more like mine, would we have a harder time calling her biracial? Like, I just want to understand how we talk about racial identity in America. And so I put it out there, and the response was overwhelming from all different types of people, all ages, all backgrounds. And it proved to be something that, frankly, people really hadn't thought about and wanted to discuss had been thinking about it, didn't know how to talk about it publicly. And so those are the things that I just love going there. And I think that the internet is it offers plenty of forums for those kinds of more nuanced discussion. And I am doing a show with Audible where I hope to be doing more of that kind of deeper dive, sort of cultural, critical conversations. And I'll be talking to young first. So young, first only different is the term that we're using, and which is, hopefully you guys have read Shonda Rhimes' Year of Yes. Have you guys read that? It's amazing. If you haven't, you should. But in it, she coins this term, first only different, FOD. And I'm certainly an FOD. There's probably tons of FODs in this room. And so I want to host conversations with those FODs, young and old and black and white, and want to understand some of the common themes in our experiences and why they matter in a moment like this. So stay tuned once my book baby is out fully.
Very exciting. This has been fabulous. I can't believe our time is over, but we want to open it up for a conversation with our audiences. Maybe we can turn up the lights for a little bit. I see some hands. I know there's some burning questions out there. We have a couple of mic runners. Great. Yes, hi.
Hi, my name is Maya Rodriguez. I'm with the University of Chicago. I do diversity and inclusion affairs there. One of the things I wanted to ask you, Elaine, is I think throughout my college career, and even now, I think that people of color and women of color do a lot of emotional labor, taking care of people, trying to assist them, and sometimes I think it's hard to take a break and know who to lean on. And I was just gonna ask, like, who have you leaned on and where have you found support personally, professionally, just as somebody who cares a lot about fashion and inclusion?
That's such a great question. Thank you for asking that question. I have found one of the greatest things about being an FOD is the tribe that came with it. And it surprised me the kind of support that exists for this like rarefied small, right now it's small, it's growing rapidly, but this group of people who understand what it is to be the only one in the room. And it's a very specific thing. And there's pressure that can only be understood by somebody who understands that experience. And so many people in the country just have never had to experience that. And that has been something that consistently has been challenging for me throughout my career for different reasons. And so there have been really amazing, strong, powerful women in leadership positions who have taken me under their wing and just like really coached me and supported me during hard moments, even during promotions that looked great on the outside, on the inside needed some coaching. And so it's really been about looking to my left and my right and being willing to be vulnerable with those people who have similar experiences. And the thing I found is so many of the things I've experienced that I thought I was the only one, or like I couldn't believe, I wasn't prepared for, when I was vulnerable enough to share it with these women, it's like me too, me too. They all have similar stories. And so I think it's, I do think there's a pressure to keep it all together, be strong for everyone. You're so independent, you're trying to make things happen, you're ambitious, but you do need a soft place to fall. And you need to find that and cultivate that tribe and be there for them as well when they need it. So, and sometimes it's about reaching out, like little text circles. I have so many little group chains where sometimes it's just sending a positive message out to everyone on like a Monday morning. And you'll never know when you needed that. Like I remember being in a really hard time and two of my girlfriends called me out of nowhere, and I was in my office like on the brink of tears, and I needed that phone call. I wouldn't even thought to reach out to anyone in those moments, but I think it's important just to say that no matter what it is that you're going through, there are so many other people who are in that, who have experienced that or are experiencing it at the same time, and it's okay to be vulnerable, and it's okay to share the hard stuff because we don't see enough of it on the highlight reels and in the headlines that we see, but believe it's happening. So hopefully that's helpful. And making time for self-care. I meditate now on Tuesdays. I go to a guided meditation group on Tuesdays. It has got my life together many times.
Hello, my name is Fadra Jaco. And I wanted to ask you a question about something that you mentioned earlier about imposter syndrome. Hi.
Hi, okay, there you are. It was like the voice of God for a minute.
Sorry. How do you believe that imposter syndrome has shaped your life, work life, for better or worse? And how did you grow from it? Do you think that you were affected by imposter syndrome because of external influence or internal influence?
Ooh, you guys came with the questions. That is good. Okay, two-part question. The first part was, how has imposter syndrome, did you say saved my life?
Shaped your work life.
Shaped my work life, okay. And the second question was,
how did you grow from it? And do you think that you were affected by imposter syndrome because of external influence or internal influence?
internal, external. Ooh, that's really nuanced. And I do think it's both. There's so much of what we have to overcome in order to show up in the world and be who we need to be and who we're called to be it requires us to let go of things that we've been conditioned to think and to retrain ourselves to see ourselves in these spaces and to see ourselves as worthy of being in these spaces. And we do lack, when I say we, I mean even young people in leadership roles, women of color, women at all in business environments. We lack role models. So whereas a white man has seen so many different versions of powerful white men throughout their lives, and they probably take that for granted, we're deprived of those role models. So when we're out there in the world, we're often rewriting the rules ourselves, and we're trying to figure out how to be. And please believe, when you try to be like a man and embody power like a man does, sometimes it does not work out well for you. So you do have to figure out who you are going to be in these spaces, and imposter syndrome is real. And some of it, so much of it is actually, it is in our mind, but it's there for a reason. We were all ingrained in this we were all raised in this patriarchy. I mean, not to use just the heavy jargon, but so we have to do the work of undoing those damaging narratives that we have all absorbed. And I think it's okay to acknowledge it. And then how has it shaped my career? I just think it's like sort of inextricably part of my experience. And at the same time, I think at some point I've tried to create an environment in my office that became the kind of world I wanted to exist in, and a safe space for someone like me, and also anyone else in the office who felt other, who might have otherwise felt like they didn't belong. And so I think changing the culture when you're in a decision-making role is the biggest thing you can do to kind of overcome your own imposter syndrome and hopefully help minimize that weight that we all kind of carry into really any room. And what I've learned is that we all feel like outsiders in some regard, whether you're a person of color, a woman, or otherwise. There is always something that we're trying to overcome. So I hope that's helpful.
Hi.
Front row, VIP section.
One more, one up there, and then maybe we have a question down here. Okay.
Hi. My name is Young Chen. I'm actually a member of the Teen Creative Agency here at the MCA. I'm also Tibetan American, and I wanted to ask you if you have any suggestions for people like me who don't have a lot of representation in the world, who want to advocate more for people like me, and speak out more for people that are different.
What's your background?
I'm Tibetan American. Yeah, so if you aren't familiar, Tibet is a country in China that is currently being illegally occupied by China. So yeah, there's not a lot of people like me here.
And that makes you like someone who has a superpower in any conversation, because you know something other people don't. And I think rather than burying that and trying to find other common ground. I think you can walk in with a sense of like ownership of who you are and what you know that other people don't, and share what you care about, because we are all so hungry, actually more than you would even think, to understand each other. But it takes someone being brave enough and generous enough to extend themselves and what they know and their culture with other people for other people to grab onto it and to understand you better. So I think if anything, this is the moment. This is the moment for someone like you, someone who has a unique perspective, to find a way, which it sounds like you have already, to carve out space, carve out a lane, and use it to put into the world what you think is missing. That's what we did at Teen Vogue. That's what you are doing. You're creating this conversation series for that very purpose. So it sounds like you don't really need advice, actually. And you kind of just put the whole room on to what you care about. I'm sure you're going to meet people after this who are going to want to learn more. So, I mean, I would love to see. Are you an artist? Yeah, I'm actually a fashion designer. Amazing. Amazing. Well, I would love to learn about what you're doing, so maybe we can you can help us connect afterwards. I'd love to keep an eye on what you're doing and support in any way that I can.
One more question.
This is so fast. This is the fastest hour of my life.
Right over here. Hi, I'm Imani Joseph. I'm also a member of the Teen Creative Agency at the Museum of Contemporary Art.
Woo woo.
And I'm just an inspiring writer and poet. And I just whenever I'm in a creative space, they always want me to separate my identities as a woman and as also as a Black person. So how do you deal with the intersectionalities of your identity and writing and functioning in these white spaces?
Oh, just like the answer of life. Just the meaning of life right here, right now. She's like, and you have 20 seconds to go. Woo! Well, there's just be. That's the only thing I can say, is you can just be. And there have been many times where I've had to do that. There's one example that comes to my mind where I was invited to write an essay in a book that was commemorating the Women's March. And I really had to sit on that ask for a minute, because I remember going into the Women's March feeling, in full transparency, detached from that mission. I felt that mission that umbrella didn't include me, because I remember coming into the office with some of these same women, and for instance, after Philando Castile passed away in the most horrifying way, and being truly to my core broken after that, and coming to work and feeling so alone in that moment. I did not see anyone crying at their desk. I didn't see other people gripped by that horror. And so to come to work the day that we lost this presidential election for folks who are Democrats and who were really rooting for Hillary, it felt like it's like the sky was falling. And truthfully, it was. It has. But they felt like there was this dissonance. You have your struggle, I have my struggle. I don't know that our struggles are the same. I don't know that you even are aware of mine. Meaning my whole community. And so I felt a little bit on the outside. I felt like I was going into the Women's March as an observer more than a participant. And so when I was asked to write an essay, I just thought, how real am I able to get? Can I get this real? Can I if I'm going to write this essay, this is the perspective that I have on this. And I thought it probably wasn't going to be appropriate, but it turns out they wanted that perspective, because there's no way to grow. And actually, I will say, once I got to the Women's March, I actually was so relieved and empowered and so inspired by the ways in which they intentionally shined a light on the intersections of all different types of women. And it felt like the most inclusive demonstration of feminism that one could possibly program. I'm sure you can poke holes, but they really covered their bases. How many of you guys felt that way when you were a part of it? Did you? Maybe some didn't. We can debate it later or online. But so I did, you know, I was able to kind of share that was a positive takeaway. But we have so much more work to do to understand each other as women in this movement, this feminist movement. Some of these same women would come into the office and touch my hair. And I'm like, you don't get it. You want me to march with you, but you don't get it, you know. And so there was this kind of anger that I didn't even realize that I had to unpack and be honest about. But the only way to make progress is if you are willing to be honest, and for other people to be willing to listen. And they were. So I guess my advice to you is just continue to speak your truth in respectful ways, and allow for the possibility that you'll be surprised that people really do want to learn how to love you better and how to partner with you better.
I want to give Elaine the last parting words for us. So I do have a question to sort of close us out. But first of all, thank you, and thank you to our audience. This keynote tonight is the first in our dialogue series. It's our commitment to fostering an open exchange with our visitors, with you, about these issues that we've just been talking about for this past hour. So please check your program books and our website. We have 3 more dialogue programs coming up in the spring. We hope to see you at each and every one of those events. And then for Elaine, to close us out, we are, 14 days into the new year. And you are, here with us. This is our tribe of change makers, of accidental and intentional activists. What's your wish for us as we march forward into the new year?
Ooh, that's a weighty question. I guess my hope would be that you don't stop, because we are living during a very specific moment in our culture where everything feels so politicized and so divisive, and it is uniquely bringing us together to have uncomfortable conversations, courageous conversations that we have not had. But in order for us to continue pushing for change and pushing back against all the regression, we have to remain consistent, and we have to build communities that are going to stick together, because it might get worse before it gets better. And then when it gets better, it's still going to get worse again. And I think that we've all witnessed the world go in directions we never thought possible. But it's because we all took our eye off the ball. And so I would just say, I hope that, my hope is that this is just the beginning. That this is just the beginning, and that some of the young people who are taking advantage of the program are going to build your own platforms that are going to house more safe spaces, so that this continues for your children and your children's children. So that's my hope. How's that for my world peace speech?
Beautiful.
No, but thank you all so much for coming. It's such an honor to meet you and to be here. Thank you so much.